Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Tuesday, September 9th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside today brings a high of 85.5 degrees and a low of 64.6 degrees. A comfortable day for September, perhaps a good opportunity to get outdoors before the summer heat fully fades away. Make sure to stay hydrated if you're out and about. Later in the program, we'll be delving into a key question. Can presidents impose tariffs using emergency powers? We'll look at the legal and practical implications of such executive actions. We'll also unpack the current state of the U.S. housing market, exploring the various factors that have led to its persistent standoff. What's keeping buyers and sellers at odds? All this and more coming up on Alex News. Stay tuned. Well, we're kicking things off this morning with a major legal development that could truly reshape the balance of power in Washington. The Supreme Court is standing on the brink of a monumental decision regarding President Donald Trump's use of emergency powers to impose tariffs, a case that could profoundly impact presidential authority over trade policy and necessitate the refund of billions in collected duties. To help us navigate these complicated legal waters, we turn to our legal eagle, Ethan.
Grace, it's a truly tariff-icy story indeed. The nation's highest court is expected to decide as early as tomorrow, September 10th, 2025, whether it will grant certiorari and hear the appeal in * Trump versus VOS Selections, Inc. This pivotal case comes after lower court rulings determined that President Trump had overstepped his authority, according to reporting from NPR and The Guardian. His administration, through Solicitor General D. John Sauer, formally requested on September 3rd that the Supreme Court review the Federal Circuit's decision on an expedited basis. Should the court agree to hear the case, oral arguments could potentially be scheduled for the first week of November.
So, Ethan, for those unfamiliar, how did these tariffs come about, and what exactly were the lower court's findings that led to this Supreme Court appeal?
Excellent question, Grace. President Trump invoked the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to impose a series of controversial tariffs. IEEPA grants the president broad economic powers upon the declaration of, quote, an unusual and extraordinary foreign threat, end quote, to national security, foreign policy, or the economy. Trump declared several emergencies, including citing drug cartels and border security, to impose, quote, trafficking tariffs, end quote, and, in its broadest use, declaring the persistent U.S. trade deficit as a threat to national security. According to the American Enterprise Institute, these led to tariffs as high as 125% on Chinese imports. The legal battle began when small businesses, including VOS Selections, Inc., a New York wine importer, and a coalition of 12 U.S. states, sued to halt these IEEPA-based tariffs. The U.S. Court of International Trade first ruled against the Trump administration on May 28, 2025, concluding the tariffs, quote, exceed any authority granted to the president, end quote, as The Guardian and NPR reported. This was then upheld and reinforced on August 29 by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit in a 7-4 decision. They stated IEEPA, quote, neither mentions tariffs nor has procedural safeguards that contain clear limits on the president's power to impose tariffs, end quote, according to NPR.
That's fascinating. I understand the Federal Circuit's decision contrasts sharply with a key historical precedent involving President Nixon. Can you elaborate on that and explain why this case is different?
Absolutely, Grace. It really highlights how these legal currents can shift. The Federal Circuit's ruling stands in contrast to the 1975 case, United States versus Yoshida International, Inc. In * Yoshida, President Richard Nixon, in 1971, imposed a 10% import surcharge using the Trading with the Enemy Act, IEEPA's predecessor, to address a severe balance of payments deficit. The court then upheld Nixon's surcharge, finding the TWEA's power to, quote, regulate imports, end quote, sufficient to infer the power to impose temporary duties. However, The Federal Circuit in Trump versus VOS elections explicitly distinguished its ruling. Freightwaves.com highlighted that a primary distinction was the, quote, unbounded in scope, amount, and duration, end quote, nature of Trump's tariffs, applying to nearly all goods from nearly every country. This was very different from Nixon's temporary, limited surcharge. Also, IEEPA was enacted after TWEA with the deliberate intent to, quote, revise and delimit, end quote, presidential authority, providing more limited powers.
It certainly sounds like a taxing decision awaits the justices. What are the core legal arguments being made for and against President Trump's use of IEEPA for these tariffs?
On one side, opponents argue that IEEPA's language, while broad, notably omits explicit terms like, quote, tariff, end quote, or, quote, duty, end quote. They argue Congress typically uses specific language when delegating tariff authority, which is absent here. The lower courts also invoked the, quote, major questions doctrine, end quote, asserting that executive actions of, quote, vast economic or political significance, end quote, require explicit congressional authorization. As NPR reports, they found this lacking for tariff imposition. Legal scholar John Yoo from the American Enterprise Institute also argues that the trade deficit, existing since the 1970s, isn't, quote, unusual and extraordinary, end quote, which is required to trigger IEEPA. On the other side, Trump's allies argue IEEPA's language is extremely broad, encompassing the power to, quote, regulate or prohibit, end quote, foreign transactions. They contend that if the president has the greater power to block trade, he also has the lesser power to regulate it through taxes or quotas. They also cite Supreme Court precedents that grant greater deference to executive power in foreign affairs, given the need for speed and decisiveness.
This case has massive implications. What could happen if the Supreme Court upholds the lower court's ruling, and what are legal experts predicting?
The trade winds are certainly shifting, Grace. Should the Supreme Court uphold the lower court's ruling, the federal government could be obligated to refund billions of dollars in tariffs already collected from American companies. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent acknowledged this possibility, noting a loss would, quote, diminish President Trump's negotiating position, end quote, on the global stage, according to NPR. Constitutional law scholar Mark Graber from the University of Maryland predicts Trump will ultimately lose this case, as The Guardian reported. Graber theorizes that some conservative justices might vote against the tariffs to counter the narrative that the court is, quote, stacked with stooges for Trump, end quote. Interestingly, he also speculates Trump, quote, will not mind a loss, end quote, as it would allow him to blame, quote, elitist judges, end quote, while still taking credit for fighting for tariffs. John Yoo, however, anticipates the court could reverse the Federal Circuit's narrow interpretation of IEEPA's powers, but still block Trump's tariffs by ruling that the trade deficit does not constitute an, quote, unusual and extraordinary threat, end quote. It's a complex, high-stakes legal chess match.
A truly complex and far-reaching case, Ethan. Thank you for that incredibly detailed and clear explanation.
My pleasure, Grace.
We'll be keeping a close eye on the Supreme Court's announcement tomorrow. Still ahead, we'll turn our attention to Story 2 after this quick break. Welcome back, everyone. Our second story this morning takes us to the U.S. housing market, which is experiencing quite the shakeup. For years, we saw skyrocketing values, but now, it seems the tables have turned. Joining us to break down this shift is our reporter, Chloe. Chloe, what's going on in this rather unsettling market?
Grace, it's a significant shift from a seller's market. The U.S. housing market is in a protracted slump, driven by a distinct shortage of home buyers. Homeowners are now lowering asking prices, offering substantial concessions, or increasingly withdrawing properties, according to Yahoo Finance and Newsday yesterday, September 8th.
So sellers are definitely feeling the heat. What's the primary reason for this dramatic shift?
The main driver is an acute affordability crisis. According to Yahoo Finance and Newsday, The national median home listing price in July was $439,450. Yet, a median income household can only afford about $298,000, assuming a 20% down payment and current mid-6% mortgage rates. This disparity prices 7 out of 10 home shoppers out of the market.
That's a huge gap. Are high mortgage rates the sole culprit here?
They are a major factor. Rates have climbed from historic lows, increasing average monthly payments by 34%, as Ground.News reports. Broader economic uncertainty and a long-standing national housing supply shortage also contribute, according to Newsday and Ground.News.
It sounds like sellers are under significant pressure. How are they reacting, and are we seeing properties pulled from the market?
Indeed, Grace, bidding wars are rare. Sellers are now offering more concessions, like price reductions and covering closing costs. Yahoo Finance and Newsday uncover. There's also a significant increase in delistings, with homeowners pulling properties rather than accepting low offers. Delistings were up 57% year over year in July, according to ainvest.com and CBS News.
Delistings? So sellers are playing hard to get, so to speak? What's behind this market standoff?
It's explained by two concepts: the rate lock-in effect and an equity-rich mindset. Many existing homeowners have historically low mortgage rates, some around 4.03%. As ainvest.com notes, they're reluctant to sell and then incur much higher payments. Also, substantial home equity, averaging around $319,000, provides a financial cushion, allowing sellers to, quote, wait for better market conditions, end quote, as CBS News and RealtyNewsReport.com report.
That makes perfect sense. So it's less of a widespread crisis with foreclosures and more of a temporary standoff between financially secure sellers and priced-out buyers?
That's the consensus, Grace. While U.S. home foreclosure rates are experiencing an upward trend, they remain historically low. The overall national foreclosure rate is about 0.13% of all housing units, considerably below Great Recession levels. Experts don't foresee a, quote, huge wave, end quote, due to robust lending and equity, as SafeguardProperties.com and Forbes report.
It seems governments are trying to build solutions. What policy interventions are underway at the federal level?
Federal efforts include the bipartisan Renewing Opportunity in the American Dream, or ROAD, to Housing Act of 2025, which cleared a key Senate hurdle about a month ago in August 2025, according to Senate.gov. This aims to grow affordable housing and streamline development, as eHousingPlus.com reports.
And what are states and localities doing?
State and local efforts focus on reforming zoning laws and land use regulations to increase housing supply and reduce costs, as Mercatus.org reports. Many are creating local housing trust funds and supporting innovative housing solutions, with some states implementing, quote, pro-housing, end quote, programs, according to CBS News and Forbes.
So a multi-pronged approach to hopefully make housing more accessible and affordable in the long run. Chloe, thank you for that incredibly thorough and insightful look into the U.S. housing market.
My pleasure, Grace.
The data and analysis presented today draws from reports by Yahoo Finance, Newsday, Ground.News, ClickOrlando.com, ainvest.com, CBSNews.com, Realtor.com, FinancialContent.com, RealEstateConsumerTraining.com, Newson6.com, MPAMag.com, NerdWallet.com, RealtyNewsReport.com, MattCurtisRealEstate.com, PhoenixNewTimes.com, SafeguardProperties.com, Forbes.com, Bankrate.com. Further sources include Senate.gov, MultifamilyImpactCouncil.org, NavigateHousing.com, eHousingPlus.com, NationalMortgageProfessional.com, Urban.org, HUD, Treasury.gov, USA.com, TheMortgageReports.com, TheMortgageReports.com, NationalHousingCrisis.org, UpForGrowth.com, Mercatus.org, ULA.org, NCSHA.org, AcceleratorForAmerica.org, PeoplesActionInstitute. Here are some other headlines. In a significant ruling that has immigrant advocates on high alert, the Supreme Court has greenlit the resumption of immigration raids in the Los Angeles area. The 6-3 decision lifts a lower court's restrictions that were designed to prevent racial profiling based on factors like speaking Spanish or appearance. Critics, including California Governor Gavin Newsom, are firing back, with Newsom stating the court has become the grand marshal for a parade of racial terror. The Department of Homeland Security has declared its intention to flood the zone in Los Angeles, intensifying fears in a city where 1 in 3 residents is an immigrant. Well, it looks like America's students are not making the grade. The newly released Nation's Report Card is out, and the results are, frankly, failing. The report shows a troubling decade-long decline in academic performance, with scores in science, math, and reading hitting their lowest levels in decades. For high school seniors, reading scores are the lowest since 1992, and nearly half of all 12th graders scored below the basic level in math. Educators are pointing to a number of factors, from the pandemic to increased screen time, but say the results confirm a, quote, devastating trend that needs immediate attention if we want to get back to the head of the class. President Donald Trump is facing a very costly opinion. A federal appeals court has upheld the staggering $83.3 million defamation judgment against him in the E. Jean Carroll case. The court rejected his claims of presidential immunity, calling his conduct extraordinarily egregious. This ruling affirms a jury's decision that Trump defamed Carroll when he denied her sexual assault allegations, saying she was, quote, not my type. Combined with a previous verdict, the former president now owes Carroll over $88 million. It seems the bill for his words is finally coming due. Tragedy in Jerusalem this morning, as a rush-hour shooting at a busy bus stop has left 6 people dead and more than a dozen injured. Israeli police are calling it a, quote, terrorist attack. 2 gunmen reportedly opened fire on people waiting for a bus before an Israeli soldier and armed civilians on the scene returned fire, killing both attackers. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the scene, stating, "We are at war, an intense war against terrorism." And in a story that sounds like it was ripped straight from an HBO script, the real-life succession drama in the Murdoch family has reached its finale. A landmark deal ensures that Lachlan Murdoch, the heir apparent, will take full control of the family's media empire, including Fox Corporation and News Corp. His 3 older siblings have agreed to give up any claim to control in exchange for a massive payout of roughly $3.3 billion. The deal ends a bitter family feud and ensures the conservative direction of outlets like Fox News will continue, just as patriarch Rupert Murdoch, now 94, had planned. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 4.0, Gemini Pro 2.5, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.